Um, should I just get started? Guess I will.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Having technical difficulties. You can go ahead and get started.
Oh, I should have put this full screen. But there we go. How do I do that? There we go. All right. So stories from the Stone Age, the domestication of the dog. I usually use this lecture as an introduction to anthropology. Well, I have an introduction to anthropology PowerPoint as well, but for people who aren't aware of anthropology, anthropology in the United States can be divided into 4 different subfields, and that's cultural anthropology, which studies human culture and society and their social systems; linguistic anthropology, which studies like human signals and language; physical anthropology, which can be, forensic anthropology, human evolution, anything up to that; paleoanthropology, primatology; and then archaeological anthropology, which studies human behavior and culture through time. And anthropology is the study of the human species. I have that written there, but that's what it is. And I usually show these handprints from Cueva de los Manos in Tierra del Fuego, because handprints are kind of found unanimously throughout the world. There's some right outside Laramie. I know I found some out there, or I was shown them. I didn't discover them. And then they're in Africa, Australia, Europe, Asia, and it's just kind of a symbol for humanity. So I think that's cool. And yeah, let's get started. The vet program, I think I already talked about this, so I can go fast. Recently separated veterans of all ages, and then rehabilitate core-owned collections, and they get paid time to job hunt, and it's a career building place. But you get to do a bunch of lab work, curating, taking photography. I give lectures. We have visiting lecturers come in. It's pretty fun. So anthropology and dogs. Let me take this real quick. So all dogs living today are the genetic descendants of the gray wolf species. And we're not sure, or I think it's pretty positive now. It's not necessarily a gray wolf that exists today that has descendant line. It's actually like an extinct group of gray wolves that has descended down into this, and dogs are what remain. I think there's multiple theories on that, but I think that's the one I enjoy the most. And then gray wolf is the Canis lupus, which means dog wolf in Latin. And then domestic dog is the familiar dog wolf, which is probably just shortened to, the familiar dog. And may seem hard to believe, obviously, because how's a Chihuahua? This name is a Great Dane, but all dogs, no matter what their breed are, were once wolves. And so I'm going to put this down, how did this happen? And I'll put this into one ecological context, and then I'll go into some dog domestication in theory, and then I'll put that all together in a neat little package at the end. So I will start off with this. We were descended from wolves, then why is there still wolves? I will hopefully explain that. And then canids first appear in the Eocene, about 56 million to 33 million years ago. And then the genus Canis itself, what we know of is wolves, dogs, foxes, appears about 5 to 2 million years ago. Or not foxes, just wolves and dogs. And to put that in perspective, Homo and Homo sapiens appear around the Pleistocene, about 2 million to 10,000 years. Humans, as we know ourselves today, probably about 200 million years ago, 200,000 years ago. And then 100,000 years ago, we're kind of 100,000 to 50,000 were behaviorally modern. And then canids mostly evolved in the North American plains, along with horses and camels. And wolves consist of over 38 or up to 38 subspecies of wolves. And that could be gray wolves, red wolves, timber wolves, and then including dogs. And then wolves are the largest of the living canids, whereas the dire wolf was larger, but that's now extinct. And modern wolves have an average weight of about 60 to 175 pounds. And I guess if we're all from Wyoming, we're kind of used to probably a little larger than 60 pounds, but that's the recorded that we have. And then distinct from other canids by their cranial and dental morphologies, but also their behavioral traits set them apart from the rest. So as you probably know, wolves live in complex social groups called packs. And packs usually consist of 2 to 4 families of wolves. and a family unit consists of about one male, one female, and their various offspring. So a nuclear family, I've seen that written places that might not be exactly nuclear in the 1950s American sense, but it's a small family group. And wolves are debatably monogamous in the sense that they raise their young together, and like the male doesn't necessarily go off all the time. They stay around to raise their young as a unit. And the average pack size is usually about 5 to 10 wolves, but given environmental pressures, that can go really high up. And I've also seen this written a lot in literature. I don't study wolves myself, so take this with a grain of salt, but I've seen that alpha males are really only a captive wolf thing, or in captivity. And that's more of a behavior that shows then, but that might appear also in the wild as well. And I think it has been documented, but the main thing we should know is that there are outcasts, or wolves that have competed for dominance, but then leave the larger pack to go do their own thing or find another. And I would keep in mind the complex social groups and the outcasts thing, because that will come back up. And those are just like really, really efficient pack hunters. It can be argued that bears and felines are at the top of the food chain, as it were, but bears are solitary foragers. And hang on, my dog just busted in here. He'll be fine. Bears are solitary foragers, and most cats are solitary hunters, and they kind of hunt at night to compete with wolves. During the Pleistocene, that might have been different. And then what makes the wolf so deadly, in addition to its intelligence, is its teeth, strength, and stamina. And they chase their prey down in what's called persistence hunting. And that's also known as being a courser, or they have coursing behavior, which means they chase their prey, not outrunning them, but they run their prey until exhaustion. And they do this systematically. We do the same thing. And this is like debatably why humans have seen wolves as a symbol of fear, but it depends on the culture. More cultures see them as, a noble or like kind of closely human animal, kind of like they do the bear. But interestingly, this is also why humans sweat. We don't necessarily have to stop to pant. We can just keep running, and we expel our heat through perspiration. We just sweat it out, whereas other animals have to kind of stop to pant. Pretty interesting. And if you guys have seen wolves in Yellowstone, luckily, I've tried to see them, because you got to wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning to do it. I've never seen one myself there, but on documentaries, if you've ever seen wolves hunt bison or elk or pronghorn, whatever they're hunting out there, it's kind of mesmerizing to watch, because they do it so systematically, and honestly, like they communicate with each other to do it. And so canids have a very long, strong snout filled with thousands of scent receptors, and also like obviously deadly teeth. And they can sink their teeth into skin, muscle, and veins of an animal. And they can exert up to 1,500 pounds of pressure per square inch in one bite, which is obviously debatably cool, but also not at the same time. And the oral osteology of wolves allows them to grab their prey and crush the leg bones and then bring them down. So crushing the leg bones is more of like, dire wolves are able to do that more apparently, but it depends on the size of the animal. Obviously, mostly wolves will like nip the back of the heels and try to like get the animal to, surrender to the, being bitten multiple times. You can see here that we have like the wolf snout is a lot longer than it would be of like, the cat or even like the dog itself. So I'll show that in the next slide here. The premolars and molars, so their first premolar or last premolar, first molar, are called carnassials, and this is designed for like crushing and chewing on bone. So that's why your dog chews bones way in the back of their mouth. If you've ever seen them chew on stuffed animals, I'm sure you have. One, makes it way more morbid when you see this picture, knowing that's a prey they're practicing to kill, and then get. And they chew their bones way in the back. They don't do it up front, just like humans would do with their molars. And then if you're into cats, take a drink of water. Felines are evolved to silently stalk and then lunge and pounce. They're not necessarily, the cheetah can outrun stuff for sure, but cats aren't necessarily coursers as much as wolves are. But they do what they do very efficiently. They also have scissor-like carnassials. Like they can bite the throat or the spine when they depending on the feline. That's why your cat likes to bring in dead animals. They're good at it, one. And then two, we domesticated them debatably to keep rodents out of our granaries. So when we started performing agriculture and practicing that, and growing a lot of food, it stays in the granaries, or we had to build granaries because it was just sitting out in the open or in some kind of like storage pile, and that would have brought rats and all sorts of other things that want to eat the food, probably mostly rats in the old world. And after the invention of agriculture, cats would have been kept around to eat the rats out of our settlements. And it's debated that cats aren't domesticated in the sense that they kind of keep the same behaviors as wild cats do, and they haven't really changed too like morphologically. So if you've ever owned a cat, which I have, they're definitely way different than dogs. They behave differently. And like a dog kind of constantly wants to please you and like wants to work and wants to, interact with you, whereas cats are more likely to just do their own thing. I think that's kind of where that comes from. Here's the wildcat, which is Felis sylvestris, and it could also be Felis sylvestris libica, which is like African and Middle Eastern wildcats, and the domestic cat is Felis catus. But if you take a look, this is just one example, but they don't really look too distinct, too different from each other in the sense that a wolf and a human does. Or I'm sorry, well, they definitely look different. A wolf and a dog. So if you look at wolves, they have the longer snout, and they can grab things here with their canines, and the long jaw and snout to have all that scent receptors and the muscles to crush down on things. Whereas a cat is a lot shorter, and that helps with the scissor-like motion to do what they do, and they can pick up animals and move them around. It's just neat how evolution works out like that. Like obviously these having a common ancestor. And then you can probably see these traits in your dogs. Wolves are hunters, and so is your dog essentially. So this is why they like to rip things apart. This isn't my dog, found it, but that definitely has happened, something similar in each of your houses, I'm sure. They need to do this. It's like in their DNA, essentially. They're teething like any other mammal does. Don't blame your puppy. That's just basic evolution and domestication. And your puppy's like essentially a GMO of a wolf. And wolves hunt using social behaviors, and wolf hunting and social behaviors are exaggerated through breeding to create different types of dogs. So essentially a tool. And if you've noticed a Saluki, it's one of the older breeds that's been bred the same way for a while, not necessarily the oldest breed. Border collies, bred for hunting and stalking. Huskies have that wolf-like appearance, but they're also built for their obedience and strength. And GSDs and German Shepherds are like among the most obedient. I believe poodles are technically equally, if not more obedient, but it's interesting that these ones both have like wolf-like appearance as well. So break this down. If you've seen a wolf run, like that's one thing, but then you see a Saluki or a Greyhound run, it's essentially just a wolf that could run really fast, and ancient people would have bred this and bred this and bred this until it became something that was just a running machine. And if you see its chest here, Greyhounds and Salukis have like this gigantic pulmonary system, like a larger heart and large lungs. And that's to just pump all that oxygen through their body, like to run really fast. And I believe they were bred to get rabbits and hunt like that back in the day. And you can see it here in slower motion, but it's just like you're exaggerating that trait in a wild animal and breeding it, or essentially perfecting a tool until it gets a desired outcome. Same with border collies. If you've ever had like, I guess the honor of seeing a border collie do what it does in action, it's like really, really cool. They just go into this like mode, and pointers do this as well. They just like shift into like a different type of behavior, and they're like locked in. My dog does this with scent. When he smells something that he really likes, usually elk poop. But dogs or border collies can just like, they'll basically stalk around the sheep in the sense that a wolf did. So wolf or sheep are naturally kind of been like, hey, that's not a cool thing behind me, and they're going to act the same way with border collies as they would a wolf. I'm sure domestic sheep now are a little more used to dogs being around, but that's the general behaviors we were looking for. And when you see wolves kind of surround something in Yellowstone here, that's what they're doing. And we breed that into wolves, or into dogs, I'm sorry. So on to part 3, domestication theories. I have a foster dog right now, and they're both just like tearing it up outside my door. So I'm sorry if you hear that slamming. Domestication theories. I put these into 2 different groups. So there's the theories as well as the artificial selection theories. So we'll start with natural selection. All biological or their environments. It's just basic evolution by natural selection, and they got to compete with other organisms in order to survive, secure their resources, and pass on their genetic DNA. Generations slowly adapt adaptations to do this and help secure their survival and pass on their genes. So that's the gist of evolution, how it works. So keep that in mind. So now we're going to go on to the self-domestication and flight distance hypotheses. And this will probably make just, how would I say this? It's interesting. That's a better word for it. The idea that wolves with more docile genes were less timid than humans. They sought to exploit more food or human food resources, and this would have replaced cooperative hunting for them. And perhaps while populations of wolves did this, or it was just a few, or maybe those like outcasts of the pack were scavenging human camps for, calories. And these ones would have been more predisposed to being docile, not even genetically, just because they don't have a whole, gang of other wolves to take on a village of humans with. So it could be argued that these are proto dogs, and more aggressive wolves would have stayed away from humans. That's probably what's happened. My mom is calling me. Put that on silent. Okay. More aggressive wolves would have stayed away from humans. And this is called the flight distance hypothesis, not in the sense that wolves fly, but in the sense of fight or flight. And it's the adrenal response to seeing humans. And this is how close they are willing to come to humans, or how long they can stay around them. So we would say that wolves that had a lesser flight distance, or the ones that could stand to be around humans longer, had a lesser flight distance, but those who couldn't stand to be around humans long had a greater flight distance. So they would just, bail. And scavenging wolves would eventually become these proto dogs. And if that sounds familiar, you can see dogs all around the world. Definitely in the Middle East, I noticed this. There was cats and dogs everywhere, scavenging. And obviously they do that here as well. My dog and other dog have just tore up a giant pillow I had out there. But they are trying to look for food, and that's what dogs do best. They are wolves that are so evolved and behaviorally shifted in what's called a niche construction to scavenge human food. And this is not my house, I promise, but it's just, I've seen countless dogs do this same thing. I'm sure you've come home to it as well, but that's kind of what happened over, the past 20,000 years. Another theory that's natural selection is the symbiotic mutualism hypothesis. And this is selection for decreased aggression. So the way the source goes, this is the idea that humans and wolves were equals in the animal kingdom. And I guess equals in the sense that we're very similar. And then humans and wolves both behave socially, and they're socially efficient and intelligent predators. And they hunt the same type of large game, especially in Paleolithic Europe, would have been a lot of reindeer and bison, and living in complex social groups. And they live in the same environments, given Eurasia, Asia, further south than that. And wolves and humans would have been competing closely. So we might have noticed after we shot an animal and didn't kill it in the first shot, you got to track the blood trail, right? And you probably could have come into contact with wolves after that. They may have found a wolf kill, and you got to there after the wolves got to it, and you might have dispatched the wolves to take the carcass if it was definitely a time of, environmental pressure where there wasn't a lot of food around, or wolves followed us to our kill and kind of stole it from us if we were like outnumbered in a way. Probably not the most likely, but it's possible. And this could have come in, would have happened with close contact. So we know that for a fact, or not that we know that for a fact, but this is kind of keep that in mind that that could have happened. And this would have allowed more docile wolves to stay close. Just out of logic, if you're going to kill the ones that bite you or the ones that are aggressive and the other ones that don't, that's what's going to happen. And this rewards them. You're rewarding them for their behavior in the sense that we do dogs, and you're killing the aggressive, or the aggressive ones ran away. There you go. So these ones would have learned to scavenge human camps. So if they followed that blood trail, they could have followed you back to your camp and found that midden heap outside of a village or outside of the cave and noticed that that was, hey, a decent food source. If that sounds familiar, especially us here in North America, humans here, I have a thing from it. This is George Catlin in 1844. You notice this is the Pawnee. And this is what he said: while the herd of buffaloes are together, they seem to have little dread of the wolf and allow them to come close in close company with them. The Indian then asks, or the Indian then has taken advantage of this fact and often places himself under the skin of the animal and crawls for a half mile or more on his hands and knees until he approaches with a few rods of the unsuspecting group and easily shoots down the fastest of the throng. So they were using wolf pelts to disguise themselves as wolves and kind of mimic that behavior in the bison. And we can kind of infer that this probably happened around Eurasia as well. Obviously, we weren't there to document what happened then, but we can assume if people are, living around animals and plants constantly, they probably would have been akin to their behavior and tried something similar. So artificial selection. This is the idea that humans are selecting for certain traits, and as Darwin would have called it, controlled evolution. He was fascinated by this. If you've ever read The Origin of Species, he loves pigeons and plants. Like, take a shot every time he says pigeons. Won't get through the first chapter. He noticed that while selecting for certain traits, like he wanted longer beaks in the pigeons, he would get other undesired traits like fluffier coats, smaller feet, or like spotted coats. Or fluffier feathers. Okay, well, I didn't want that, so he tried to breed again to do something else, and that would, or to get another desired trait, and that would change something else. He never really figured this out in The Origin of Species, at least to my knowledge after reading it. If you read the whole book, it's mostly just him talking about different things that he's seen and done. And then the last chapter is when he talks about evolution. But usually do this as a lecture. I can't hear you guys, but I'm assuming the answer would be, if you had it, would be Mendel. Gregor Mendel is the guy who figured out the Punnett squares. And interestingly, Mendel knew a lot about Darwin, but Darwin did not know a lot about Mendel. I've researched this a bit. It's pretty interesting. So Mendel was figuring out all those Punnett square things and how, experience were going, or how that works. And Darwin was just like, I wonder how that works. So you read his book. So it's cool. But had he figured that out, he would have been like, oh, that's cool. And probably would have changed the book a little bit. So the pet wolf or Pinocchio hypothesis is the idea that ancient peoples would have adopted wild wolf pups. And this is selecting for certain traits, less aggression. You'd praise those with them, killing or releasing those without them. The problem, besides the first problem being you're sticking your hands in a wolf den, is that wild pups grow up to be wild wolves. It's possible to tame wolves, but from multiple wolf conservation groups I've spoken with, and like just from things I've read, it's highly difficult to keep a wolf, domestic. If you bring it into your house, it's still a wolf. It's not, you can't just pick it up and make it a domestic dog. And it requires constant training. You still got to be alert. It's a wild animal. It could rear back and bite. It can, depending. If there's wolf behaviorists in the audience, like maybe you disagree or you agree wholeheartedly because you've seen it happen or something. But I would imagine that I would, be a little trepidatious going or hanging out with wolves really close. They're still unpredictable, but the point is they don't have domestic biology. they're wild animals. So another theory, this is more recent, is that humans are possibly trapping for wolves or trapping wild wolves for their fur. And according to the article, wolf hide is malleable in the sense that you don't have to, like if you had a whole bison hide and that was your like clothing, and then you had that sewn up, if something ripped, you could take wolf pelts and kind of use that to sew the patches because it's smaller and you can use it for, it's more versatile, I guess is the word. And then you also have that stable hide source outside your camp, whether they were tied up or maybe corralled somehow. But if you needed it in times of pressure, you had some hides. You also had food. And in a sense, like tied and protection, because if you have tied up, sentries around your camp, that's probably going to be not entertaining for another animal to come sneak into. It's by Germonprey 2018. And I believe there's like obviously physical evidence and archaeological evidence for cut marks on wolf bones. Obviously people could have been eating them too, but obviously there's different cut marks for tanning and different cut marks for consumption and just like different ritual type things. So it could have been for furs. And then how long does it take to make a dog, which would be the question after all these theories, because we're here now, but if dogs have been around for quite a long time, like how long did it quickly take when they were first domesticated? Because since recorded history, we've had dogs. Dmitry Belyaev was a Soviet geneticist, and he was going to breed silver foxes to, one source said for the Soviet army. I think it was just like an actual like study he wanted to do. I wasn't sure what was going on with that, but point is he was breeding silver foxes with other silver foxes to be less aggressive, so it was easier to get their pelts. He only bred the docile foxes with docile foxes, and he bred aggressive foxes as a control. As a scientist, I would probably think the same thing. Like you want to have two different groups to disprove the other, or to complement or disprove the other. And what happened after this would have made Darwin just amped, was that in 20 generations of controlled breeding, the foxes changed dramatically. And they would have had, or they did have, began to bark, which isn't necessarily a fox behavior. So bark in the sense that a dog does. Foxes do like that weird high-pitched yip bark type thing. They had spotted coats, and they became multicolored. In these pictures, their ears aren't floppy, but other domestic foxes that exist now definitely have floppier ears, because that's not only bred for, but it just naturally happens after this many generations. And also their tails curled and started to wag. So not that they just wagged on their own, but in a sense that it helped show that they were less timid around humans and they were excited and were less, timid around them. And they looked more juvenile into adulthood. That's the most important. And this is called neoteny, and that's retaining your juvenile features into adulthood. And I'll show you later, but if you've ever seen a wolf skull versus a dog skull, it's very different. And obviously it looks the same. It's ratio-wise, it's smaller. And if you've seen, obviously the ibex is the wild goat or its ancestor, and the ibex is a lot more robust and more kind of imposing than a goat is. And the mouflon for the sheep, same thing. The aurochs, which is an extinct cow, is the ancestor of cows and that had large horns. But now we can have cows that don't have horns and that just the bulls do, or you can have, depending on the species of cow or breed. But you're looking for something that has less aggressive traits and is more docile. And his group, the aggressives that were all bred together, he called them dragons. And the way he tested this and his team, they would take a gloved hand and stick it into the cages. And if the foxes just got really scared of it and hid in the back of the cage, they had that flight distance. And if they attacked the glove, obviously that was a clear sign they were aggressive. But if they kind of just were, curious and sniffed it and didn't cower or show any fear, he considered this tame. And later studies have shown that they had extremely high adrenaline levels, and it has something to do with, or adrenaline has something to do with their docileness and their aggressiveness. and somehow linked with these traits. But another thing to know is that when your bones and cartilage are forming, you have these things called neural crest cells that go and make them, for German Shepherds, it makes them stand on end, or for our ears does that too. But in domestic animals, those neural crest cells are kind of decreased, and that's why their ears flop down and their coats change. That's a whole other topic, but this would have made Darwin, happy, because this is what he was like talking about. So to wrap it up, the story of dogs and humans, I think I said this earlier, but anatomically modern humans come about 200,000 years ago. And 100,000 years ago, we start to leave Africa and radiate around Eurasia. We go through the southern Asia and get all the way down to Australia, and obviously later on into the Americas. So the Ice Age and the Pleistocene was the last glacial maximum. It was the Ice Age. It was cold. It's a harsher and difficult environment than it is in equatorial Africa or South America. Just picking plants off the tree, like fruits, or digging easy vegetables, picking them is a lot more difficult. You're eating a lot of tubers that you got to dig for, especially when it's like frozen, and you had to hunt more. It was a little more of a hostile environment. Depending on where you are, it's a little more hostile, less hostile, but we had to live in caves and structures. So human hunter-gatherers would have arrived, and being also an efficient, intelligent, and adaptable species, we're probably the worst invasive species on the planet, and we would have run into the wolf often. So wolves kind of have this scenario: our population can decrease, or we can figure out how to deal with this new invasive species. We would have hid from cats, bears, and wolves in caves, also hyenas and anything else that cave bears. Well, they'd have been in caves, but it's another story. Wolves are there during the day. We had to compete with them. There would have been close contact. So imagine one day after a hunt, a wolf follows you home and starts to scavenge outside your camp, and you're not sure what to do. So you throw it a bone to, keep it at bay. So if generations do this, you might notice which wolves are nicer. So maybe even name them. I know this is like pretty post-processual, postmodernist, but just roll with me. May have been more tame. You could have named them, and they live around your camp. And this is maybe where the Pinocchio hypothesis comes into place, where you're adopting the pups. Say the mom got gored by a bison or a mammoth, and the puppies are left alone. Obviously, humans are curious. They might have picked up a puppy to, hold it and see what it did. So theoretically, and then if you put this over generations and generations, you have this like system where humans are similar social systems. And we're obviously, some of us have been on the other end of the spectrum of monogamy, but like it's we're essentially in the Pleistocene, when you're living in a close-knit social group that was dependent upon everybody doing their part to collect calories and not freeze or starve, you're going to have to collectively rear children together. So monogamy in that sense. And wolves are the same way. So the same behavioral rearing in a sense. They would have realized this quickly, and our social systems, and start to rely on us for food, because why go hunt as a pack and fight for dominance in your own packs when you could just eat human trash? It's a good trade-off. Nothing really kind of hunts wolves. Nothing hunts humans anymore, but then it did. It probably helped us protect us and hunt. And you would have killed, in Dmitry Belyayev's sense, like killed the dragons and praised the dogs. So it's debated. Like I would say fire is probably our greatest invention. Maybe Netflix, but I'd say wolves are pretty up there for me. Dentistry also. And scientific evidence for this would be that at least by 15,000 years is like the for sure dogs are like around and are a thing. And this could have been in East Asia. There's also a domestication event that happened in Europe, and the genetics aspect of this is not my thing, so I'll just go brief with this, but there's been proto-dogs remains found in caves dating as far back as 30,000 years. But again, this is a wolf skull here, and this is a dog skull. So if you can imagine finding a very fragmentary piece of this in a cave, and maybe you only have like the zygomatic process and the mandible, or you can't really tell if that is a wolf or a dog. So it's not Pokemon where something just evolves at level 36, it's like takes thousands of years. So there's some, you know, interchangeable features between these two. So it's hard to tell which one's which. So archaeological evidence is kind of hard to go off of. But the genetic evidence kind of says that 20,000 years or so, there's dogs, but by 15,000 years, like both of those line up that there is dogs. Physical anthropology, I kind of just do this to show how anthropology and dogs are so connected. We get what's called oxytocin. It's a chemical that releases when you are in love, when you're breastfeeding a baby, that tingly feeling you get when you see a significant other in like the back of your head, or maybe I'm just weird. But that's oxytocin releasing. And like if physically it's been tested that when humans see dogs or just pet them, you get that same release in your brain. So that's been adapted over time. The cooperative eye hypothesis, this is by Pat Shipman, and she suggested that if you look at other animals, not a lot of them have white sclera in their eyes. It's mostly a human thing. It's mutated in domestic or in different great apes, but it's definitely made very strongly in dogs. They're bred in there, which is quite interesting. And this was possibly for hunting in silence back in the day, but mostly for the fact that dogs can read our emotion very well. And that's where it comes from. And there's been a whole bunch of scientific tests on that. I can link to those. It's fascinating stuff. And then zoonotic diseases, obviously, ticks, worms, all things like that. The first instance of rabies is from a Babylonian text where someone said their neighbor's dog went mad and they had to put it down. So we can presume that might have had something like that, but we can't tell how far rabies went back, to my knowledge. Am I doing on time? Am I okay? Not sure. Oop.
You're good.
Cool, sweet. The Von Oberkastel dog or wolf was in Germany about 14,600 years ago. And this was a pup that was, or not diagnosed, I'm sure they didn't diagnose it with this at the time, but they know it was sick with canine distemper. And they nursed it back to health, and you can see that pathologically, and it healed, but then it eventually died from, I think maybe that again, or something similar, or a complication of that later. And it was in a burial alongside two other humans. And I think genetically this might be more of a wolf than a dog, but regardless, someone's buried with a puppy. And we don't necessarily bury ourselves with bison. And then we have Ain Malaha, and I believe it's Israel, Palestine today. Sea of Galilee, the river's going to be safe. 12,000 years BP, and this is a Natufian woman. She's middle-aged, and these were the first epipaleolithic hunter-gatherers to sit down and be sedentary, not necessarily make agriculture, but they're in one spot for most of the year. And she is resting here with a puppy underneath her hand by her head. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the puppy didn't die the exact same time she did naturally. So there's significance there. And this is like one of the coolest instances of it to me. And the reason I got into like studying this as a subject was because like my intro to anthropology class showed this picture, and I was like, that's pretty cool. I didn't think about that. In the Coster site in Illinois, I think this is currently the oldest burial in the Americas, dog burial, I should say, in the Americas. I think there's a few canid remains around that might be a little older, about the same age. One's in Agate Basin, but it's hard to tell if that's a wolf or a dog, archaeologically at least. And this is in Illinois. This one was buried, and I think according to Angela Perry's paper, this was eating a lot of riverine fish, and it was eating like a diet similar to humans in the area. And you can study dogs you can study humans through dogs as like a proxy. So you can see what they were eating, and with the domestication hypothesis in mind, you can see that they were eating human trash. And it kind of goes along with those theories. Next one. There we go. Linguistics. We have a lot of semiotics with dogs, like pointing, gestures. If I tap my foot twice on the ground, my dog knows to lay down. That's not using English. That's just a straight up signal. That's linguistics. Gesturing. If I even like slightly raise my voice, his ears will go behind his head because he knows a bad dog is coming. So there's language there. Verbal, same thing. Commands, talking, training. And in a book by Eduardo Cohn, my cultural anthropology teacher like forced me to read this book, and I was like, okay, I'll read it. And in this book, they talked about how this group in the Amazon would grab a dog's snout and look into its eyes and then blow ayahuasca into the dog's nose. And as they would do this, they would grab the dog, as in this picture, and as the anthropologist called it, speak motherese, which is, I hate to do this, but it's like the "who's a good boy" like thing like that. And you're teaching the dog in that culture. You teach it like you will not steal from the granary. You will not like steal. I think that's what the book was saying. But this baby talk, or as they put it, motherese in this, I don't think that's the greatest name for it, but we do this. And sometimes like unwillingly, I know I come home and just talk to my dog like an idiot. And then mythology around the world. This is my favorite part. You got Fenrir, Ixotl or Xolotl, Anubis in Egypt, Cerberus and Greco-Roman mythology. And then indigenous American mythologies, there's tons of spirit guides. Dogs are part of most creation stories. And interestingly, they're usually separated from the rest of the animals in creation. They're usually associated with humans, or they're in Mesoamerican, or was it Arctic mythology, they are considered traitors to the animal kingdom because they're stuck in between. In Iroquois mythology, they like had the chance to be human during creation, but they were too promiscuous and gross and filthy. So they got stuck as dogs, and it's like humans' duty to take care of them. I would ask this question out loud, but I can't hear any of you. But the similarity between this, as an anthropologist, you kind of look for patterns, would be that these are all associated with, minus these ones, death. Ixotl is the god of the dead. Fenrir he eats the sun during the apocalypse, so I'd say that's with death. Anubis is the god of death, or the underworld, I can't remember, associated with death. Cerberus literally guards the river Styx in some mythologies, or he is like the pet dog of Hades, so with death. And also in Aztec mythology, your dog waits for you on the other side of the river that separates the earth from the lands of the dead. And it waits for you to get there so it can ferry you across and show you around, essentially. I guess poetically, it shows you to transition into death, but it's just chilling there waiting for you. Culture, obviously, we have war dogs. I find it unfortunate that dogs have no choice half the time and they have to go do it. But if you think about it objectively, it's pretty amazing like what dogs can do. In some, I believe, American and Israeli, it might happen in British SAS and things like that, but they put cochlear implants in the military dogs. They put titanium teeth in some of them, titanium canines, and they put cameras on their back. So you literally have a like biological drone running through like caves and places where you're trying to send a dog in. I believe in the Bin Laden raid, there was a German Shepherd or a Malinois, I can't remember, but they literally jump out of planes with people and don't care, which is really cool, debatably. And then you got hunting culture around the world. We use dogs. There's a cool study in I think Nicaragua, where they were studying dogs and humans hunting together to see like how much benefit you get from it. And it seems that when you're using dogs to hunt, you do got to give them water, you do got to give them food, but you get more reward from the food they return for you than you have to give to them. In Arctic culture, females were to raise the puppies, and then when they came of age, they worked with the men to be sled dogs or work dogs. Also, most dogs were forced to sleep outside in the snow their whole lives, chained up. But one dog was usually permitted to live in the house. This is Inu in Micmac mythology or in culture. And that one dog then had a soul, it had a name, and it was part of the family. But they chose one kind of indiscriminately, which is neat, or probably maybe because it looked a little prettier than the other ones or something. But it's an interesting cultural practice. Conclusion, I have no idea which theory is correct. None of us will unless we have a time machine. But based on the genetic evidence and just, isotopic evidence we have from dogs, it's pretty clear they were eating human trash. So we can imagine they were, scavenging, and that's part of how this came to be. We know dogs live along with humans. They do various tasks for us. One paper calls them a biotechnology, which is, I think, a really cool way to put it. This has been bred into them. They can still interbreed. Coyotes, wolves, dogs, I believe jackals can interbreed as well. Jackals are just like the Eurasian coyotes. And you can have coy dogs, coy wolves, dog coyotes, the whole thing. So that genus is pretty interchangeable. And the dog is a wolf that adapted to human life about, I should change this, not 30,000 years. That's like at the most extreme, because we can't tell, without a time machine to see if that was a wolf that was buried, or a dog, but let's say about 20,000 years, dogs have been domestic animals. And I forgot to mention here in the Egyptian one, it's been noted that Ethiopian wolves or southern Egyptian jackals scavenge around cemeteries a lot. And I guess this is morbid, but if someone dies in their house and their dog is left, they do eat. Usually, sometimes it happens, the dog starts to eat them. So if you can think about that, well, that was one theory as to why dogs are associated with death. They scavenge, and they would have eaten carcasses and human carcasses. So that's something that happened then. Doesn't necessarily happen in our culture now, but or all the time and in the open. But it might have been part of why these mythologies came to be. Just one theory, but that's it from me.
We have got all of the questions for you.
Yeah, I saw them blowing up. I don't know if I can answer all of them, but
I'll read you them kind of systematically, maybe.
Okay.
So can you talk more about wolf pack social dynamics? Specifically, how do you think hunting of wolves by contemporary humans, specifically like taking out key pack members, impacts their social dynamics, social learning, and general group behaviors?
Sure. I'll start that off by saying I think I said it earlier, I'm not a wolf behavior person. I don't necessarily study how that works. I just know the superficial aspects of it to know this. But in terms of their group dynamics, I don't know if I can speak too much on that, but I do know that like when they are taken in captivity or released into the wild, they have obviously different behaviors that like kind of mirror each other, but some that differ entirely. And when a wolf has been predisposed to humans more, they have a little more of that like scavenging behavior more so. I don't know if that answers the question at all, but I'm not too versed in.
And then you suggested that cats may not have really been domesticated while dogs are. Could this be in part a result of differences in social carnivores versus solitary carnivores and how they're like actually pursuing prey? We often joke like our dog considers us as part of his pack, whereas like the cat just sees us as their food.
Sure, I can definitely answer that
provider.
one. Solitary for carnivores, yes. I think that is partly why cats are so independent. If you leave your cat alone for like 2 weeks in the house with food and water that dispenses, they'll be fine. But like a dog will just tear your house apart from social anxiety, separation anxiety, things like that. So I definitely think in the past, the difference between a solitary carnivore and a pack carnivore definitely changes how like the animals like evolves with humans being present in their environment. So cats are just already adapted to doing what they do now, so it's kind of why they haven't necessarily changed too much.
And then going back to hunting group dynamics with wolves, is there any indication that their hunting patterns have changed over time?
Yes. So in the modern day, like you can tell just based on like historic accounts of wolves and like just the sheer numbers of them in the Americas when people got here, when Europeans got here to document it, they definitely were more and more numerous, and it seems they had a different, dynamic just based on like how much they were interacting with humans. But now wolves kind of like, they're smaller packs. They're not as robust, or the packs aren't this big numbers. and they're like dealing with humans in their environments. So like with the release of, or the wolf conservation laws, like on ranch land and things like that, it's definitely affected their behavior for sure, I would say.
And then have heard about crossbreeding of domestic dogs and wolves as being fairly common in prehistoric North American plains. Is this true or fake news?
With wolves and dogs, dogs and I believe genetically, yeah. There's a lot of like admixture between coyote, wolf, and dog definitely in the plains. I'm pretty positive that was a study I've read, or multiple studies, but I know like anecdotally that is a thing. Yeah.
Awesome. And then what is the oldest dog breed that exists today?
I see, depending on your definition of like breed and species, I see it differently. The oldest like niche group of dog breeds I've seen as the Chinese dogs, like the Shar Pei, the Chow Chow. Those ones have very old DNA with that Asian domestication event. But then I've also seen the same thing saying that like Salukis are one of the oldest dog breeds. Not to say that's the first breed that came from wolves, but it's just one that was like very prominent and written about and recorded in obviously Egyptian and Middle Eastern tablets and writings. And then genetically, the oldest dogs I think are like the Arctic dogs, like up north.
And then kind of off that, have genetics identified breeds from pre-contact dogs?
So breeds, I can't speak too much on that. I know we can differentiate between like the ones that have, I think the Coster dog for sure, Angela, if you're in the audience, you might know, but it has coyote DNA in it, and you can definitely tell that there are like similar, there's a trait, or it was an enzyme that's found in pre-contact dogs, like historic archaeological ones, that is found in some lines of dogs today. So that kind of links back to them. But it seems like the pre-contact dogs have been like completely replaced. Like to my knowledge, I might be misquoting that, but yeah.
And then another one off of that question. Is it true that the only surviving, I guess, genetic material from pre-contact dogs in North America is a sexually transmitted disease?
I have seen that. I don't know of the validity of that, because there's different traits like you're looking for when you do like the genetic sampling. But I anecdotally have heard that. I can't confirm or deny if that is one. I think the PBS video talks about that, on how the dogs came our best friends, I think is what it's called. But yeah.
And then, do you think it is ethical for people to breed varieties of dogs that are more susceptible to certain diseases and deformities? Where is dog breeding headed, especially as pet ownership seems to be on the rise?
Yeah. So to preface this one, this is my scientific opinion and personal opinion. If you're breeding a dog that can't breathe, you're obstructing its like airways, and it's like, you know, struggling to breathe, and you know it's going to have that, I find that unethical. I don't speak for the whole scientific community. However, if the dog is already bred and it's born and it's alive, like you might as well have it. Like don't get rid of it or anything, but like it still needs a home kind of thing. But I wouldn't personally keep breeding dogs that like, you know, but it depends, because some of them you can cure with therapies and things like that, or with certain medications, so that's fine. I don't know, it depends.
And then when did we start breeding or domesticating dogs for non-hunting purposes, so like lap dogs?
Yeah. So dogs up through like almost a couple thousand years ago, like really just kind of looked like wolves. I know that just genetically or archaeologically, based on their bones, they did. And then up to, they got a little smaller to like domestic dog size that we know. But definitely in the Roman period, they were trading. They loved greyhounds, like all over Rome. There's just greyhound statues everywhere. They were importing those from the Middle East. That greyhounds are a huge thing. The ancient Chinese dogs I was talking about have been around a while. And I know the Greeks had Molossian hounds or Molossian mastiffs, and that was a distinct breed. So if those were that distinct at that point, where the statues obviously showed like how different they were, there were probably breeds way before that too that I'm not sure of. But
And then what is your opinion that dogs domesticated humans in that humans learned to work with other animals, allowed humans a healthier life by, in one way, allowing them to sleep through the night as the dogs guarded camp?
can you repeat the beginning of that?
What is your opinion that dogs domesticated humans in that humans learned to work with other animals and were allowed to sleep through the night?
Sure. The way I always answer this one is like species is kind of essentially a spectrum. It's like nothing is 100% something. Like we have some Neanderthal in us still too, or at least I do. Most Northern Europeans do, but like it or Asian, like if you have your 23andMe, it'll explain it. But it's hard to tell what is what. And the same thing with, or I mean, you can tell. Just to put something in a definite category, especially in the past, is hard to do. So in the same thing as that, I just wanted to tangent. The saying whether we're domesticated or we domesticated them is kind of just like your choice of like wording of it, essentially. Because like in a sense, like dogs domesticated us. Like we were, if you think of it this way, we don't have to, like we're more sedentary because we have stuff that can protect the camp and whatnot. That's one like leading, or not leading theory, that's a theory on it. So that could have led to humans being more domestic and sedentary, but like domesticated, like us becoming genetically domesticated, I'm not sure of. But it's just like how you word it, I guess.
And then I'm saving the best question for, or the most interesting question for last, but when did spaying and neutering become a thing?
I don't know. So I'd answer this with just an educated guess, but I'd imagine as soon as people figured out how it worked and like neutering and spaying worked, probably neutering before spaying, because I'd imagine it's a little easier to do that. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, actually. I mean,
then,
for performing surgery, probably, but yeah, sorry.
And then we've got a question from Philip who says that they have an excavation near Santa Fe that had 17 dogs all buried together in pit house backfill dating from about 1000 AD. Any thoughts?
My thought on that is it's really cool and I want to see it. I did hear about that recently. Yeah, that's a great find if you dug that up.
And that, I think, unless I missed anybody's question, I asked what the oldest dog breed that still exists, right? Did I ask that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that is all of our questions. If anybody has any last minute ones, make sure to either type them on Facebook in the comments or type them in the Q&A or the chat. Either one works, and we'll get those asked. David, thank you so much for doing this. It's kind of last minute, but thanks.
Yeah, had fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like that's it. So if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
They can, I guess, I'll post, are you on the, yeah, I can just post my name on the Facebook page there. I have my personal email. My Instagram is probably the thing I'm most active on. That's ethnocynology. I'll type that out here. I literally can't spell it out loud. How do I type? I'll figure that out after. I'll put it in the Facebook. But yeah, you can email me, Instagram, or I have a Facebook as well. And I'll put that on the Facebook page.
Awesome. And if you guys are in the Bighorn Basin or have found a bison skull in the Bighorn Basin, you should bring it by the museum. We have a project going all month. And I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but yeah, so thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.